Today I'm here to talk about the 20 backlist books I plan to read this spring, covering the months of March, April, and May. Although if I'm honest, as soon as I post this video, I usually get started reading these books because I'm very excited for all of these. This video is going to cross the various genres I read, so dark fiction as well as science fiction and fantasy. So hopefully there is something for everyone here. All that being said, let's get started. First up, let's talk about dark fiction, which will cover the horror thriller books I read, and generally anything that I describe as dark is going to fit under here. And this spring, I decided to go with a little bit of a theme, going back to my roots, and so I decided to purposely pick out some of the more disturbing or messed up books on my TBR, books that I really should have read by now, books that have a reputation, and so that's what I'm doing here. First up, we have Out by Natsu Kirino. This is a Japanese thriller that follows a woman who is in an abusive relationship, and she ends up, at the beginning of the story, murdering her spouse and then asking the help of her female colleagues to help cover up this crime. So I really love the premise of this one. It sounds fantastic. You have this group of individual women who are bonded together trying to cover this all up, and while of course it's horrible that they did the murder, there's also this weird vigilante justice of did he deserve it and all of that. I'm really looking forward to this one. It's been on my radar for a really long time and I don't have an excuse why I've waited so long to read it, but I'm going to change that this year. Looking forward to it. I definitely want to read more translated fiction, especially more Japanese fiction this year, and so it's about time I got to this one. Next up, we have Choke by Chuck Palahniuk. This will actually be my first book by this author and maybe not the right place to start, so let me know down below if you think I should go with another book. But this one follows a man who is down on his luck. He's just trying to get by, and by accident ends up choking in a restaurant and decides that it's a great way to swindle people and scam people and get money. So he goes on to go to other restaurants and pretend to choke and take advantage of other people along the way. This one just sounds weird and strange. I think the subject matter and the whole setup sounds really interesting. Again, it is my first Chuck Palahniuk, and he's definitely an author I need to try. I need to have an opinion on him. I need to know what he's all about. And so I think I'm starting here, but again, I can be swayed and swap this one out for another one if you feel strongly. So let me know down below in the comments. Next is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moschwitz. And this is an author who I've read before. I read Lapona, which was weird and messed up. I'm not really sure if I liked it. I also read Eileen by this author, which perhaps is a little bit more mainstream, still very dark and disturbing. And so I am eager to try more by this author. Again, they are somewhat hit or miss, but if you're going to talk about dark, disturbing, messed up fiction, her name always shows up, and I definitely want to read more of her backlist. This one, I believe, follows a woman who doesn't know why she's not happy and spends a year exploring that, but from the premise and knowing the author, I think I'm completely getting the actual story wrong, and I suspect it's going to be something all different when you actually get to see it all play out. So I'm looking forward to checking this one out. It's been on my list for way too long, and I'm hoping I love it. I hope it disturbs me, and I'm just excited to see what is going on in this one. Next is The End of Alice by A.M. Holmes. It's a story that follows a young woman who is writing letters to this predator that is in prison. This is another one that is just on every list of messed up books, and I'm really not sure if I'm going to like it, but again, if I'm looking to read something more extreme, something more intense, this one keeps showing up on the list. I've had a few of you recommend it to me. I'm going to try it out. I'm not saying I'm going to like it, but if I can, I will read it through and report back what I think. And we'll just have to see how messed up this goes because I'm not sure if I'm prepared for the places that this one could lead. Next, we have Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. And this, of course, is another one that's been on my radar for a while. A lot of my friends really enjoy it. It follows a woman who goes around taking pictures of young men, and the story goes on from there. It's, again, one that's going to be really inappropriate and dance on the line of why am I even reading it from everything I understand. I believe this author takes more of a literary twist to it, perhaps, or at least doesn't go straight for the down and dirty. I have no idea what I'm going to think of this book, but I do have some friends who I trust their opinions that really like it. So I'm hopeful that it's going to hit the sweet spot of being the kind of disturbing I'm looking for and not the other kind. And I also want to continue to read more Haruki Murakami this year, and so the next one I want to do is After Dark, and this is a coming-of-age story following an individual who spends a night in Tokyo after dark, and it's one that's been on my radar for a while. Compared to a lot of his other work, this one is quite short. It certainly sounds up my alley. More of what I've read so far has been on the semi-fantastical side and and so this one sounds much more grounded and gritty. And of the dark fiction I'm talking about here, this one I don't actually expect to be super disturbing. Maybe it will be, but it's one that just I've been meaning to read. I have it on hold at the library and I keep postponing it, and I need to just check it out and see it for myself. Very excited for this one. And I also want to read Geek Love. This is a dark literary tale that is all centered around a circus or a carnival. It is again one of those really iconic books that always shows up on these lists of really intensely popular, disturbing books, and it's one that I've kind of been leery to try out. The carnival always disturbs me to begin with, and so the idea of turning it into something more messed up and more dark, I've kind of heard pieces of the plot which just freak me out. So this one I should read because it will disturb me, but I'm also afraid to read it because I think it's really going to hit home in just some ways that I have some weird phobias all around the circus and carnival that I'm not looking forward to, but I'm going to read it and report back reluctantly. And finally, for dark fiction, I want to read Notice by Heather Lewis. This is a book that Ollie from Criminali has labeled as one of the most disturbing books he has ever read, so naturally it immediately went on my list, and it's one that again I want to at least check out, even though I'm terrified because if you don't somehow follow his channel, highly recommend it. I think you all do. He has more subscribers than me at this point, and well deserved given the amount of fantastic videos he puts out on a regular basis talking about dark fiction, crime fiction, and a lot of interesting conversation on e-readers. Anyway, this is one that I'll admit I'm solely putting on my list because of his recommendation or review at least, and I understand involves a young woman who ends up doing tricks in order to get money and a kind of dealing with, of course, the sex traffic life and how that all devolves into this dark narrative. The subject matter alone is going to be tough to read, I suspect, and I'm really curious but incredibly nervous to see where it goes. I will report back. I will do my best to finish it and see what it's all about. Now let's switch over to science fiction, and I feel like in past years I was prioritizing more fantasy over sci-fi, so I do want to swing the needle the other direction, especially when it comes to my TBR planning. So I have 5 science fiction books to talk about, and then I'll talk about 3 fantasy books. So the first science fiction book I want to talk about is a classic I should have read by now, and that is Solaris by Stanis Lem. This is a story that follows an individual who goes to this planet that is covered in water. It is an ocean planet, and when he is there, he uncovers these memories. It's one I really don't know a lot about other than knowing it is such a beloved, important classic, and it's really something I'm looking to do this year, as I'll talk about in this list, is filling out those gaps in my reading life as people talk about newer books and say, oh, this is like Solaris, or this is referencing that. And if I haven't read the original material, I'm in no place to make any commentary on how something compares or references an older work, and I really want to read this one. I feel like it's one I will love, but I'm just basing that off a feeling. I need to go read it for myself and see how it all falls out. Speaking of science fiction classics I should have read by now, I also have The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin on this list. Again, it's one I don't actually know a lot about, but I would like to read more for sci-fi. I read The Left Hand of Darkness maybe 2 years ago, and I meant to read more of her sooner, and I haven't. This is an author that I feel like I should love and should really enjoy, and I just need to dive into more of her backlist. And she is such an iconic voice in science fiction, particularly a female voice if you're looking for that, and so I'm excited to read this one. I will report back. Next, I want to read Lord of Light by Roger Delancey, and this is a sci-fi fantasy mashup that is about a future where humanity has found the way to make themselves immortal. I actually really tend to enjoy when the two genres are put together. A lot of my favorites actually have fantastic elements to them, so I'm hoping this one will hit the right mark. Again, it's an author, I believe I read one book by them before, but I haven't read most of their popular books. This will be my first major book by them I'm reading that gets a lot of love online, and again, I just need to check it out for myself, hoping it'll be a favorite, but at least it'll allow me to have a better understanding when people reference this book, what they're talking about, and if I love the book, bonus, all the better. I'm certainly hoping it'll be up my alley. Next is Aurora by Kim Stanley Robinson, which is a piece of generational fiction following this ship as it is moving out of our solar system. I have read and enjoyed several books by this author before, and so I want to continue to do that. When I do do find an author I like to continue on through their backlist because it's so much easier to find favorites when I've already liked other things by an author. And so continuing on with that, I believe I started this one a while back but got distracted. Tell me if I'm not the only one who has that happen to them. And so I've been meaning to get back to this one for quite a while. I remember really liking the start of it, and so I think this one will be up my alley, but I need to see it through and hope that it's another one of his favorites because I have either loved his books or not. Most of the time I love them, and I have a good feeling about this one. And finally, for science fiction is one I'm really excited about, and based off of the never-ending recommendations, I think a lot of you will be too, and that is Childhood Ends by Arthur C. Clarke. I read a couple of his books back in 2023 and really enjoyed them, and then promised to continue on immediately with his books, and then didn't do that. Again, I get distracted with other things. There are so many books and authors calling for my attention. This, I understand, follows our future where there suddenly are these alien overlords that appear across our cities, and what they demand is to actually solve our issues. They fix poverty, and they are overlords, but they appear to be benevolent and appear to offer us a utopian future. This is one that I've heard has a fantastic ending. A lot of people say it's his best work, their favorite, and the fact that I liked his other books before, I have a really good feeling about this one. Again, another classic that I should have read years ago if I consider myself to be a science fiction reader at all, but I'm fixing it this year in 2025. I'm so excited for it. I'm going to make a prediction that this book will end up on my favorites at the end of the year. Let's see if I'm right. And finally, let's talk about fantasy. Again, I'm keeping it to 3 because I really want to get back to my roots of focusing both on dark fiction and science fiction. But there are a couple that just crept up my TBR and I couldn't not put them on the list. The first one is The 12 Kings of Sherakai by Bradley Ballou, and this is one that is an epic piece of fantasy that I believe is all set in the desert. I don't know a lot more about it, but with the summer creeping up here very slowly, I want at least to be able to imagine the heat, even if I'm not feeling it on my skin. At least hopefully I can read it on the page. It's a chunky book, and I am continuing to want to read some of the bigger books off my TBR, hoping I love it. I've heard mixed things about it, so again, I would love to hear if you have read it. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you think I will like it, most importantly? And again, if I finish it this season, I will report back. Next is A Summer in Shadow by Daniel Abram, and this of course is half of the duo that writes as James S. A. Corey for The Expanse. And so I've been meaning to read more books written solely by this author. I have read their newer series that was available for review from Orbit, the one that starts with Ashes to Ashes. However, this one is really beloved at the start of an epic fantasy quartet, and what especially appeals to me is the fact that I understand this first book is very much set inside a city. So while I don't read a lot of what I'm going to call urban fantasy, meaning those books that involve vampires and the supernatural in our world, I really love epic fantasy that is set in secondary worlds but still has an urban setting to it, and that's what I see as this book. Sounds really great. I love learning about the culture of the city, the tone, and really feeling like I'm living within it, which is what I'm hoping to get from this one. Obviously, if I like it, I do plan to finish out the quartet, ideally this season. It might dip into the summer depending on how quickly I go, but I'm excited to get into this novel and this series, and again, I think I'm gonna love it. At least know I like this author's writing, since the fact that I love The Expanse so much. I think that this one has a really good shot of being a favorite of the year. And finally, for fantasy, I want to read Promise of Blood by Brian McCallum. This of course is a book that is well known for having a hard magic system involving flintlock fantasy. This author, I believe, was a student of Brandon Sanderson, so again, you get that really clear system of magic that is all tied into the world and well explained. It's one of my favorite subgenres or type of fantasy stories because I love when fantasy feels easily understood and kind of appeals to that more science-driven part of myself, even if it's all, of course, magical. I've heard good things about this one. I honestly don't read a ton of military fantasy, which might be the only thing that will trip me up with this book and series, but I'm hopeful again that the magic will really pull me in. Hopefully there are some characters that I can root for or like, or even if they're morally gray, I'm completely here for that, of course. I believe it is the start of a trilogy, so I do plan on continuing on if I like the first one, and I'm eager again to cross off a book that's been on my list for quite a while. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And also again, I'd love your feedback if you think I'm making a horrible mistake by reading one of these, if you have a better recommendation by the same author. All of that feedback is really helpful. I do listen to it, I do pay attention. Again, while it is not technically spring here, I'm probably gonna get started with this list, so look forward to more review content coming down the road talking about these books as well as the new releases that are coming out in the coming coming months. And if you want to stick around, subscribe, I appreciate that. You can drop a comment, even just an emoji lets me know you're here. Give this video a thumbs up if you think I deserve it. Hit that little notification bell, and I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.